Welcome to RootsDiscovery.com. I'm your host, Mick. Today we look at the Hurley family of Grande-Anse, New Bandon, New Brunswick, Canada. Now before we get to the story, I'm going to read something that was given to me from Tom Goldrup, the great-grandson of Nora Hurley Goldrup. My brother Jim and I made a trip in the 1970s to Bathurst, New Brunswick, Canada to trace our Goldrup and Hurley ancestry. Our great-grandfather, George Edward Goldrup, married Honora Hurley in Bathurst on February 11, 1873. Nora Hurley was the daughter of Patrick Hurley and Julia McCarthy, both natives of County Cork, Ireland. While on our visit, we met various descendants of George and Nora, as well as descendants of two of Nora's siblings, James Hurley and Abigail Hurley Ahern. While there, the daughter-in-law of James Hurley and the granddaughter of James Hurley took us on a visit to members of the Ahern family and also to the St. Simon and Jude Cemetery in Grande-Anse, Gloucester County, New Brunswick, where a number of the Hurley family were buried. They also related some history of the family to us, which follows below. Family tradition is that they left Ireland shortly after their marriage on the 20th of February 1841 for North America due to great poverty and food shortages there. They, along with other Irish refugees, landed at Cairn Point near Bathurst, Gloucester County, New Brunswick, Canada. They then walked to the area of Waterloo, where they settled. Here they each cleared away a number of acres and had to travel by horseback to Fredericton, New Brunswick, about 150 miles distant, to register their deeds. Many of them raised potatoes in the woods and holes from uprooting trees. At the cemetery, they pointed out the tombstones of two of their sons, James and Patrick Jr., and their wives, as well as their daughter, Abigail, and her husband, Jeremiah Ahern. Also, another old tombstone, that of Johanna Hurley Welton, who is a native of Kinsale, Cork, Ireland. They thought she may be a sister to our Patrick Hurley, but were not positive. The section of the cemetery that overlooked the sea where they said Patrick and Julia were buried had fallen into the waters, carrying with the landslide a number of graves. From our own research, we had found their eldest child, unless there had been some earlier that died young, was Charles Hurley, born in New Brunswick in September of 1845. 4 years after their marriage. We also found that Patrick was a farmer, and on the 1861 census, his age, listed as 51, resided in the lower district of New Bandon, in or near the vicinity of Grande-Anse and Pokeshaw. Patrick died there sometime between 1861 and 1871. Julia lived with her son Patrick in 1891, and died in Grande-Anse on May 21, 1901, and buried beside her husband 2 days later. From both the story, my grandfather, Henry Goldrup, and his younger brother, Fred, Julia's cause of death was accidental, and there are two different stories giving opposing details. One, from Fred, has her killed in a carriage accident, and the other, from Henry, says a bale of hay fell from the barn loft, striking and killing her. Now here is the actual death certificate for Julia McCarthy Hurley. It does not show what she actually died from, but it does show that she died at Grande-Anse and was listed at 87 years of age. So that puts her born around 1814. What we're looking at here is a partial map for Grande-Anse in New Bandon. What we see is Lot 6 with the arrow pointed to it. This is where Patrick Hurley and his wife, Julia McCarthy, had settled. This lot was previously settled by a Jeremiah Cowhig. Here is Lot 6. This is from 1833, and it does show that Jerry Cowhig, as he is listed here, which was Jeremiah Cowhig, is occupying Lot 6, where Patrick Hurley had settled years later. Let's learn a little bit more about who Jeremiah Cowhig was. Now this here is a petition for land debt forgiveness in 1833. The very first individual at the top is Jeremiah Cowhig. Right below him is a Tim Collins, and this is followed by a Philip Cowhig. But the question I have is, who was Jeremiah Cowhig, and what was their relationship, if any, to Patrick Hurley? This is the 1861 census of New Bandon, where we have Jeremiah Cowhig, a farmer, 65 years of age, living with his wife Bridget, a son David, and a brother Philip, who is 68 years of age. Before we look at Ireland, let's look at the 1833 petitioning for land debt forgiveness, where we have Jeremiah Cowhig at the top. On the third line is his brother Philip. But I'm paying attention towards the bottom, where we have a Daniel Lehane and a Timothy Lehane. Let's keep those two individuals in mind when we look at Ireland. I transcribed some of the records I found on Jeremiah Cowhig for some of the records located in Ireland. Here we have Jeremiah Cowhig and his wife Bridget. Well, it just so happens her maiden name was Lehane, like those two individuals that were found on that petitioning for land debt forgiveness in 1833. Well, Jeremiah Cowhig marries Bridget Lehane in September of 1819. I'm looking at the two sponsors here, which was Daniel Keating and John Cowhig. I located those two individuals living in the town of Burren in Kilbrittain. I assume that Jeremiah Cowhig was also from the town of Burren. Here is the 1861 census of New Bandon, which shows that Patrick Hurley and Julia McCarthy are living next to John Cushing, who is a widower. Patrick Hurley is listed as 51 years of age, so if this is to be believed, he would have been born around 1810. We see that his wife, Julia, is listed as being 43 years of age, Charles 15, James 13, Honora 10, Fabia, which is actually Mary Abigail, is listed as 8, Johanna 6, Patrick 5, and Michael is 2. I'm having another look at Patrick Hurley's age. It would appear to me that it says 51 years of age. Look at the second line, which is for a Joseph Pinette. It states he is 51 years of age. If we look below that, there is a Mary R., and I can't make out that last name, but it says she is 47. 2 lines below that, there is a May, which is her daughter, listed as 17. So it would appear we have 3 different ways that this particular enumerator wrote the number 7. So is Patrick Hurley listed as 51, or is he listed as 57? Now I cannot determine that. This survey from 1863 shows that Lot 77 was surveyed for Charles Hurley. So perhaps at this point, Charles Hurley was setting off on his own and establishing his own farm in Black Rock. Here is the 1871 census of New Bandon. It shows that Charles Hurley is now back with his family. Is this an indication that Patrick Hurley, the father, had died suddenly and Charles was forced to move back with his family? I was able to look at the DNA results for 4 different individuals. These 4 individuals were the descendants of Patrick Hurley and Julia McCarthy. The one thing that I took notice of was the fact that the McCarthy family seemed to be coming from the Rathbury and Ardfield parish, while the Hurley family appeared to be coming from Kilbrittain and Rathclaren. Now I'd like to start off by showing the actual marriage of Patrick Hurley and his wife, Julia McCarthy. Here, Julia is listed as Julia Callahan. We see that the witnesses were Joseph Mahoney and Michael Hurley. What this also shows that they were in the 3rd and 4th degree of consanguinity. This means that they were second cousins 1 time removed. Now the truth here is that the mystery was solved using DNA. This DNA led us to an Abigail McCarthy Farrell and her sibling Daniel McCarthy. Here we see their mother, which was Abigail Hurley McCarthy. This is 1860 in West Jefferson, Ohio. Now here we have the DNA match, which we discovered. This was the sister of Julia McCarthy Hurley. She was baptized on the 3rd of May, 1829, to James McCarthy and his wife, Abigail Hurley. What it says to the right is that her town was Carrickfordine. Here we have the baptism for Julia McCarthy Hurley. This was on the 18th of October, 1817. It almost looks as if it says Julia Hurley, daughter of James Hurley and Abigail Hurley. This is probably due to the fact that on the right we see the sponsors. It's written as Thaddeus, which is Latin for Tim. Tim Hurley was the one of the sponsors, and presumably the priest jumbled the surnames. But this is no doubt Julia McCarthy, as we see on the right, is the town of Carrickfordine, with the parents of James and Abigail. Now I went ahead and I transcribed the records from Rathbury in County Cork, and this is where the family of a James Callahan McCarthy and an Abigail Hurley lived. This town, Carrickfordine, was a very small town with farmers, and we see that they had a relatively large family. We have Julia McCarthy, who was baptized on the 18th of October, 1817, and then we see where we had that DNA hit, which was Abigail McCarthy Farrell, who was baptized on the 3rd of May, 1829. How we figured this out was we had in the baptismal records two families as it appeared. It appeared we had a James Callahan married to an Abigail Hurley, and also a James McCarthy married to an Abigail Hurley in the same town of Carrickfordine. When I went ahead and I looked at the valuations, this one from 1850, I noticed that a James McCarthy is listed, but it is crossed off and Callahan is written above him. Now this would have been in Lot 1, where he would have had a house. Now if we moved to the following year of 1851, we once again see in Lot 1 a James Callahan. Here we are at the Griffiths valuation, where we find once again James McCarthy listed in Lot 1 with a house, office, and garden. So the question as to why James McCarthy is sometimes known as Callahan is not known. It could just be he was the stepson or is the biological son of a Callahan. We just don't know. Right, where the arrow is pointing is Lot 1 in Carrickfordine. Presumably one of those buildings that you can just make out is probably the house where James resided, and that is where Julia McCarthy was likely born. We were able to find the origins of Julia McCarthy, but where did her husband Patrick Hurley come from? DNA suggests that he was from Kilbrittain and Rathclaren. There's also other hits in neighboring Ringroan and Ballinspittle, but for the most part, his DNA seems to be linked to this area of Kilbrittain and Rathclaren. DNA supports the claim that Johanna Hurley Welton was in fact Patrick's sister. However, on her tombstone, it states that she was a native of Kinsale. The DNA that I am viewing suggests strongly that the Hurleys were in fact from Kilbrittain and Rathclaren and not Kinsale. So why would they have put Kinsale on the tombstone? Well, perhaps this was just simply the port that they left from in County Cork. This marriage record from the 20th of February 1871 shows that Cornelius Welton, son of Bartholomew Welton and Johanna Hurley, married a Margaret Ahern. Cornelius's witness was a Honora Hurley, which was Honora Hurley Goldrup, so this is his cousin. Let's take a look at the marriage record once again for Patrick Hurley and his wife, Julia McCarthy. The witness listed for Julia was her uncle, Joseph Mahoney. For Patrick, it is a Michael Hurley. Let's see if we can figure out who this Michael Hurley was. I had a look at the parish of Kilbrittain and Rathclaren. There appears to have been only one Michael Hurley. He married Margaret Mahoney, and we should pay attention to the fact that his first son that was named was Charles, just like Patrick. We also see that Patrick Hurley, along with an Ellen Reagan, sponsor his daughter in 1829 named Johanna. On 3 different occasions, Patrick Hurley, along with Ellen Reagan, acted as sponsors. This began in 1824. So if this is the Patrick Hurley of New Bandon, then he simply could not have been born in 1810. He would have been older than that. He had to be an adult and had to have been able to take care of the child in case something had happened to the parents. So let's see if we can figure out who this Ellen Reagan is that had sponsored with him 3 times. So we have the mystery solved in regards to who Ellen Reagan was. She was the wife of Charles Hurley, therefore she was the sister-in-law of Patrick Hurley. Now we're looking at the source of the large DNA hit that all 4 individuals were detecting. This comes from a Nora Griffin Cauchy. If we look to the right, her father was John Griffin and her mother was Nora Hurley. This is a 1900 census of Boston. It shows that Nora Griffin is a servant, and she is stated that she is born in September of 1877, and she arrived in the United States in 1898. On the 21st of September, 1898, Nora Griffin arrives in Boston. She states she was born in Bandon, County Cork, and that she has a sister also in Boston named Julia Griffin. So if we remember back to that marriage record for Honora Griffin, she states that her mother was Honora Hurley and that her father was John Griffin. Here we have the birth register for Honora Griffin. She was born on the 4th of September, 1875 in Rathrout, and it states that her father was a farmer. So let's see if we can find Julia, her sister. This shows that on the 19th of September 1871, Julia Griffin was born in Rathrout, also the daughter of John Griffin and Honora Hurley. Because this record is so blurry, I'm just going to go ahead and read it. On the 28th of February 1865, Honora Hurley, daughter of John Hurley, a farmer of Grande-Anse, marries John Griffin at Kilbrittain. The witnesses were Patrick Hurley and Margaret Hurley. These children were both the son and daughter of Michael Hurley and Margaret Mahoney, so they were the cousins of Honora Hurley Griffin. This is the family of John Hurley and his wife Judith or Julia Coghlan. The last child that they had was Honora Hurley Griffin. She was baptized on the 18th of July, 1844 at Grande-Anse. What we should pay attention to is the fact that John Hurley names his first son Charles, just like Michael and just like Patrick Hurley did. If we look to the right, we find 2 sponsors. We find Charles Hurley and once again, Michael Hurley. Now we have a bit of a complication. We have what appears to be 2 or 3 different Patrick Hurleys. We have the one that moved to New Bandon. We had one that has a child named Jeremiah in 1837, along with his wife Ellen Hurley. And then we have another Patrick Hurley, or perhaps the same one, that a year later marries Catherine Collins. Now the difference here is I believe the one that married Catherine Collins is living down in that Glanduffe area, which is right near the village of Kilbrittain. That Patrick Hurley seems to be affiliated with James Hurley, and also a Dan Hurley that was married to a Honora Sullivan. I believe that he is probably just a cousin to Michael Hurley and Patrick Hurley. Now, the other Patrick Hurley, which was the one that went to New Bandon, he appears to be coming from the north, and I wonder if he is the individual that was listed up in Mulskinlehame with the large farm. Now let's take a look at the town of Mulskinlehame. This is coming from the year of 1833. There we see that Patrick Hurley at the bottom has 32 Irish acres of improved land. Now, 32 acres of improved land in Irish acres is over 50 statute acres. So this Patrick Hurley, like the one in New Bandon, had a sizable farm. This is from the 1861 census of New Bandon, which shows Patrick's farm, which was Lot 6 in Grande-Anse. Shows that he had 40 acres of improved land. So this is very similar to the Patrick Hurley that was in Mulskinlehame. Here's a map of Kilbrittain. If we look at the southeastern corner, we see Gloucester. That is where we located the large DNA hit, which was John Hurley and his wife Judith Coghlan. To the north of that area is Grande-Anse. That is where Michael Hurley resided. But he was a store owner, and he is right near the town of Kilbrittain. That is where he had a house and a pig house. So he is obviously of farming background, but he just happens to own a store. If we go to the north, we find that Patrick Hurley with the large farm in Mulskinlehame. West of there is the town of Barley, and that is where we find a Dennis Hurley. Now there appears to be another Charles Hurley living in Knockbrown, but I cannot see that he is related to the Patrick Hurley in Mulskinlehame. So, is it possible that John Hurley originally came from those northern towns and moved down south, where he just simply took over another farm? Or were the Hurleys always down in those southern areas and were not included in the tithe allotment books because the farms were not of that much value? I think there's a very simple explanation for Patrick Hurley settling on Lot 6. Probably Jeremiah Cowhig was aware of Patrick Hurley coming to live in New Bandon, and because he had already known him in the parish of Kilbrittain, he sold him his land in Lot 6. Here is a baptism that took place on the 25th of February, 1819. This was Catherine Ahern. She was the daughter of Jeremiah Ahern and his wife Julia Lee Hayne. We should take notice of the fact that Michael Hurley, the brother of Patrick Hurley, is acting as sponsor. Significant here is the fact that Jeremiah Ahern and his wife Julia Lee Hayne settled also in New Bandon. So what have we learned of Patrick Hurley of Grande-Anse? Well, he was from the parish of Kilbrittain and Rathclaren. He was possibly the farmer from the area of Mulskinlehame, Kilbrittain, County Cork. On the 20th of February 1841, he marries Julia McCarthy, also known as Julia Callahan. She was the daughter of James McCarthy and Abigail Hurley of Carrickfordine, Rathbury, County Cork. Patrick would appear to have had brothers, which included John Hurley, a farmer of Gloucester, Charles Hurley, an assumed farmer. Then we have Michael Hurley, the tradesman of Grande-Anse. And finally, we have a sister, Johanna Hurley Welton of Pokeshaw. If you would like help in finding your Irish roots, contact me at rootsdiscoverycontact@gmail.com. This has been your host, Mick. See you soon.